there's a legendary story of how Rome was founded. It all goes back to the Trojan War. Remember a little bit of the Trojan War? And Aeneas, a man from Troy, escaped with his old father, young son. They eventually settled in Italy. His son became the king of a small town called Alba, which is about 27 kilometers, 15 miles south of where we are. Very nice place, by the way. That's where the summer residence of the Pope is located today. And his descendants, there was a sort of dynasty, and centuries later, in the 8th century BC, one of the kings of Alba was King Romulus. He was very wise, loved by his people. His younger brother, however, wanted to be king at all costs, so he was kind of evil. He got rid of his older brother. He had him kidnapped, banished, took his place. Numitore, who was already exiled and banished, had a beautiful daughter. She stayed behind, and her uncle, of course, didn't want her to be a mother and have children because they would have been the heirs to the throne, and one thing led to another. And the uncle, the evil king, Amulia was his name, he ordered her, Sylvia, to become a Vestal Virgin. The daughter of Numitore became a Vestal Virgin. Vestal Virgins were like female priests. They had to maintain their virginity, like nuns, more or less. She went for a walk near a small river called Almone, and she fell asleep. It was a beautiful day. There was a valley. The river was there. It's all beautiful. And she was seen by the god Mars, the god of war. Couldn't resist. He came down from Mount Olympus. She was asleep. He was very gentle, very quiet. He just approached her. Her hair was like silk. Her skin was like velvet. And then he left. And when she woke up, she was pregnant. So he was very gentle, very quiet. Very gentle. And she gave birth eventually to twins, called them Romulus and Remus. Of course, Amulia was not just frustrated, he was furious. He didn't believe it. He didn't buy the story of the god Mars. He thought that she broke her vows. And typically, Vestal Virgins could not be killed. They were sacred. And therefore, there was a way around that. They would be buried alive. I didn't kill her. She was alive. And so she was buried alive. And the twins, Romulus and Remus, were thrown into sort of a basket in this river, the Almone River, and which then blends into the Tiber. And the basket with these babies, instead of drowning or anything, they were found by a wolf, a female wolf, on the western side of the Paletine Hill. That's where they were found, and they were saved by this wolf. And she started to breastfeed them, to nurse them. And eventually, Titus Livy talks about a shepherd whose name was Faustolo. He found them, took the babies into the village. They grew up with him. When they were grown-ups, they decided they were going to establish a city. They got into an argument, who's going to be the founder, who's going to be the leader. They watched birds, and eventually, Romulus didn't want to argue with his brother. He loved him too much, so in order to avoid any further argument, he just killed him. And Romulus is the founder of Rome. And the Romans thought the city's name Rome comes from Romulus. Of course, this is a legend. I'm just making it very simple and very short for you without getting into too many details. But if you think about it, you can sort of trace the origins of the legend, can't we? Right? For example, Romulus and Remus, we just heard, were born of a god and a virgin. That should ring a bell. Okay. What about the basket story? Does anybody remember that? What's that? Moses, right? Moses. The killing of your own brother. Cain and Abel. I mean, it's like the Romans read the Bible and says, all right, I like this story. This one too. So these myths, okay, every people around the world has a myth of some sort as to how it all started. There's two reasons. One is that we don't know how it started because we don't have the evidence or information. So when humans don't know stuff, usually they make it up. Okay? Tour guides do it all the time. And not me. And secondly, if there's a myth that involves divinity, well, that means that our people are better than others. We are the chosen people. We are the sons of the god of war, Mars, right? So anyways, that's the reason why the Palatine Hill was important. And the one person who will go back to the religious aspect, almost, we would say, of the Palatine Hill is the first Roman emperor, Octavius, who will become Octavian Augustus Caesar in 27 BC. He takes power, after defeating Cleopatra and Mark Antony together with Agrippa, takes power, and he establishes his residence on the Palatine Hill by purchasing a number of homes and creating a first nucleus of what eventually will become the official residence of all the emperors. And when the Romans would talk about this residence, in other words, the building itself, they would talk about it using the same word of the name of the hill. Right? This is the Palatium, the Palatine Hill. And when they talked about the residence itself, the building where the emperor resides, they would also call it Palatium, which is the name of the hill, the Palatine Hill, right? Palatium, and that's where the word palace comes from in English, or palazzo in Italian, palacio in Espanol, paleo français in any other language. The word itself comes from the name of the hill because the first of its kind, the first palace, we would say, is the palace that was established first by Augustus, but later expanded into some conglomerate of buildings which covered up the entire hill. As I said, only a small percentage have been excavated. Why do we talk about excavation? Why do we have to dig in order to find stuff? How did it get down there in the first place? Did it sink somehow? Of course not. It was actually buried in a natural way. After the palace was stripped of all of its precious marbles to be recycled, mostly to decorate churches, a lot of this marble, by the way, is on the floor of the Sistine Chapel. The porphyry, the green serpentine, the peacock marble from Greece, the yellow Numidian marble from Tunisia. On the floor of churches, especially the Sistine Chapel, a lot of that. If you ever go see it, just don't look just up, but look also on the floor. All of it was taken from here, from the Palatine, from the palace. Okay. Once it was depleted, there was nothing else needed to be done here. The whole area was abandoned. Another reason why it was abandoned is that the aqueduct, the Claudian Neronian aqueduct, was destroyed by the Visigoths in 410, and so there's no water. And without water, you can't live here. So the whole thing is abandoned. When you abandon an area, you know what's going to happen? This. The vegetation will take over. The plants are going to grow on the walls, from the walls, the trees, everything's going to be slowly covering everything up. The dead leaves are going to pile up, okay, from the trees, the plants, the dead leaves, nobody removes them, and when you leave dead grass, dead leaves, weeds, whatever, it's going to slowly decompose and become soil. And in terms of the time it takes, about 100 years, that gives you approximately 3 feet of dirt. 100 years is going to be about 1 meter. So in 1,500 years, we get about anywhere from 10 to 12 meters, about 40 feet of dirt that we would need to excavate to reveal most of the structures that are now simply sticking out of the ground here and there. You can see them simply because they're sort of sticking out, otherwise they're buried. And there's very little left in terms of the beauty of the imperial palace. Very, very little. So we're going to get to walk, see a side of it, and then we'll get to see those areas that were indeed excavated. Just grow randomly.
Those are olive trees?
Those are olive trees. Oh. These are olive trees. They were planted here by the Barberini family, who owned the eastern side of the hill in the 1600s. They had vineyards here. So the simple fact that these guys planted olive trees and vines and vineyards for winemaking, again, reminds you of the fact that this area in the 1600s was the countryside. There were cows and farmers here. Nobody lived here. It was all abandoned. But guess what? Those olive trees, this is not, they're not growing on a natural slope of the hill. If we start digging under the olive trees, we will see the continuation of the building, which we see again here further to the left.
Oh my gosh, it's
Oh,
huge.
wow.
It's under
It's humongous.
the buried. Right?
Oh, it's all buried.
So there's a lot of work. That's how it's finished. You can really see almost like a cross section. Take a look. I think it's quite pretty. Doesn't it remind you of parquet?
Oh, yeah.
This is called herringbone style. You find it pretty? You find it beautiful?
Yeah.
That's because the definition of beauty today has sunk so low that we find things that are beautiful whereas they aren't. In ancient Rome, this would have been the worst kind of floor you would have walked on. No emperor, no senator would ever walk on a floor like this. It was just for slaves.
Oh.
Now, if this was for slaves, what did the emperor walk on? Well, they walked on marble, beautifully cut, geometric shapes, colorful marbles. That's what they thought was most precious and most beautiful. But yes, it is pretty, indeed. And our parquet gets this form sometimes. So this is a fraction of a floor level that has collapsed because nobody takes care of this. Further ahead, we see a portion of an aqueduct. It's an internal aqueduct. Aqueducts, you all know, there were 11 major aqueducts in ancient Rome. There's 4 of them that still work today. Has anybody been to the Trevi Fountain yet?
Yes.
Have you seen it? Okay, the Trevi Fountain is one of the end points of the largest branch of the Virgin Aqueduct, which was built by Agrippa in 19 BC. The fountain itself was built between 1735 and 1762 to celebrate the refurbishing of the aqueduct. But the aqueduct itself is ancient. The water's running on its own, just the force of gravity. There's 2,600 fountains in the city of Rome, and the vast majority of them, almost all of them, they run on simply the force of gravity. In other words, there's no pump pumping the water, which means the water is running and there's no way to bring it back. It's just wasted water. The average number of gallons, every minute Rome is wasting about 40,000 gallons, about 160,000 liters of water per minute. Fresh drinkable water, that's why you see people drink water, and if you want to fill your water bottle later on, we'll find one of those fountains where you can do that. Sauna, let them enjoy a dinner with our candidate. There's almost nothing left. They rebuilt the water fountains. Hey, listen. Learning anything? Yeah. What is interesting is that sometimes within the structure, you can see the pipes for the water. You see this sort of big clay kind of tube, and you can see the bottom of it as well within the wall. What's most interesting is the heating system of the different rooms. Let me show you right here. Little room, the walls of which are gray, made of concrete. Okay, it was sort of like a bath. Okay, and there are steps that lead into it. If you look at the outside of the wall, you will see these very weird square pipes. You see them at the bottom, and you can see them also on the right side in between the walls. You see that? So that's the heating system. And it wasn't hot water that went through those pipes, it was hot air. So they had furnaces with wood. They would heat the air that would simply heat up the air in the pipes. The pipes were heating, and they were insulating the wall. More than heating the wall, it was preventing the temperature from changing from the inside. I mean, coming up with this 2,000 years ago is just incredible and extremely efficient.